I'm joined by BJP MP, former Minister Jayant Sinha joins me. Appreciate your joining us, Mr. Sinha. I want to get a sense of how you at the BJP and the government sees what's happening at the moment in Gaza and Israel. Are you very clear, as the Prime Minister says, terrorism in all its manifestations and forms must be condemned, must be rejected, and therefore the Hamas must be seen in this instance as the principal villain of the peace?
Rajdeep, very good evening to you. The Honorable Prime Minister has been very forthright and clear in articulating India's position, which has been consistent now throughout our government, which is that we condemn terrorism in all forms, that we have said, and the Honorable Prime Minister has become very well known for having said it, that this is not the era, the age for war. That we have to follow the UN Charter, that we have to ensure that all disputes and issues are resolved peacefully and through mediation. This kind of an unprecedented assault on innocent civilians and the death of more than 900 Israeli civilians through these brutal attacks is terrorism and is not acceptable in a civilized world. If there are issues, if there are challenges, there are channels, there are mechanisms for communication, for discussion, where these issues can be resolved and dealt with. But we cannot have, in today's very volatile and turbulent global geopolitical situation, these kinds of very terrible and very, very destructive and brutal attacks, particularly on civilians.
But what is very interesting is the Prime Minister was very quick to offer support to Israel. On the other hand, there is very little mention, if any at all, of the Palestinian state or our traditional support to the idea of the Palestinian state. So while the Congress is being accused of not mentioning Hamas explicitly in its CWC resolution, the BJP has been extremely silent when it comes to the sufferings of the Palestinian people.
Rajdeep, we have to first deal with an act of terrorism, which is what we are confronting right now. Once these hostilities cease, once the terrorism stops, once this kind of, frankly, cross-border terrorism stops, then we can discuss legitimate demands on both sides. But these cannot be done in this environment of hostility and this kind of unprecedented attack on innocent civilians. India, as you know, has been the victim of these kinds of attacks on innocent civilians as well. We remember them all too well, unfortunately. And you don't negotiate at gunpoint. It's not possible to have any kind of discussion or any kind of negotiation when these kinds of hostilities and these kinds of cross-border terrorist acts are being undertaken.
But it almost seems as if the BJP is very clear, Israel is our all-weather friend and ally, and therefore we will stand with Israel. To that extent, that seems a slight departure from the past when the Congress was in power, when their first reaction would be to emphasize or reaffirm their support for a Palestinian state. For example, the BJP tweeted on the 7th of October, what Israel is facing today, India suffered between 2004 and 14. Never forgive, never forget. So am I right in suggesting that the BJP is very clear, we will put our weight behind Israel at a moment like this?
Rajdeep, we are against cross-border terrorism. We are against targeting innocent civilians. We are against these kinds of unprovoked hostilities. And clearly, Israel is suffering from that right now. Israel is a victim of this right now. And whether it is Israel in this particular instance or whether it was the 9/11 attack on the United States, we have always condemned and always come in support of those that are suffering from cross-border terrorism, because we have suffered from it so extensively. Now, that being said, we have friends across the Middle East. We have good relationships with all of the players in the Middle East. As you know, right now, there has been a very serious discussion ongoing between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is another country with which we have very friendly relations, to be able to come up with an accord which will further stabilize the Middle East. We also have very good relationships with other players in the Middle East, such as Iran. And so our goal across all of these different relationships and all that's happening in the Middle East is to ensure stability, is to ensure peace. And again, as the Honorable Prime Minister said, this is not the era for war. This is the era for stable relationships between countries, for democracy, for freedom, and for prosperity. We are already globally facing many, many serious challenges, like, of course, the issues that we are dealing with respect to climate change, the pandemic that we've just dealt with, the debt crisis that many countries are dealing with right now. So under these circumstances, with all these global challenges, to in a completely brutal way to establish this kind of a cross-border terrorist act is really not what the world needs right now.
But how concerned should we be, given that this Israel-Hamas war comes less than a month after India, along with the US, Saudi Arabia, UAE, France, Germany, Italy, European Union had announced an ambitious India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor during the G20 summit. Is this a huge setback? And is that a concern? Even the Saudis at the moment aren't openly willing in a way to support Israel. So will that be a huge setback to this idea of this ambitious corridor?
We need economic stability. We need good relationships with all the players in the Middle East so that game-changing initiatives like this Middle Eastern Economic Corridor can be initiated for the sustainable prosperity of all of the countries associated with this. This is precisely why this is not the era for war. This is the era for cooperation. This is the era for trade. This is the era for economic growth and ensuring prosperity for all people. If we can collaborate in that fashion and if we can work together, then we can help everyone. The Israelis, the Palestinians, the Saudis, the Iranians, everybody will benefit from these kinds of cooperative and collaborative arrangements, which is exactly what we have tried to do through our continued still we are presidents of the whole G20 process. And you know, Vasudev Kutumbakam was actually our slogan through the entire G20, and it tells you very clearly what our approach is, which is one earth, one family, one future. That's really what we are working to achieve.
You know, in conclusion, I get a sense that at one level there's this diplomatic tightrope walk, given the fact that we have strong relationships with moderate Gulf states. At the same time, we have a strong relationship now with Israel. There's a personal chemistry, it appears, between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And many are saying Prime Minister Netanyahu, we put all our eggs in his basket, and he finds himself under pressure after these terror attacks. How much of this is this, therefore, diplomatic tightrope walk that India will have to do in the months ahead?
The Honorable Prime Minister and, of course, the Honorable Foreign Minister and the National Security Advisor have very good relationships with everybody in the Middle East. The Honorable Prime Minister has been awarded the highest honor that can be received in the UAE, in Egypt, and many other countries in the Middle East. So he is very well respected. He is very well regarded across the Middle East. And that enables India to be able to put together initiatives like the Middle Eastern Economic Corridor.